gave it up?
You could just hum a song.
No, I still play. I just don't really have time or place but I still play at the hobby.
Yeah, keep your fingers in there.
Yeah. You don't want to lose that muscle memory. And, yeah. I've lost the calluses on my fingertips from the guitar trick, so they'll come back. Should I? Thank you, glad. All right, welcome everybody to Philosophical Society. Today we have a very special guest speaker, our very own Vince Loam, and he will be presenting the Great American Songbook. So if you'd all help me give a round of applause and welcoming Vince.
Thanks, Andy.
You're welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Well, just to set the tone, thank you, Glenn. Or, hey, it's Glenn.
Welcome.
That was Glenn Shirley helping us out here. Yeah, that's great. That's nice. Just exactly the way I figured would happen. Very nice. Thank you. Hey, Andy, what's all these people doing in my room? Oh, gosh. What a way to start. Well, I thought I'd set the tone with a good example of a song from the Great American Songbook. This is probably right from the middle of the heyday of this era. So I'd like to do this tune for you and just kind of start things off. Okay? It's called It's Only a Paper Moon. Say it's only a paper moon sailing over a cardboard sea, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Yes, it's only a canvas sky hanging over a muslin tree, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Without your love, it's a honky-tonk parade. Without your love, it's a melody played in a penny arcade. It's a Barnum Bailey world, just as phony as it could be. But it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Without It's a melody played in a penny arcade. It's a Barnum and Bailey world, just as phony as it can be. But it wouldn't be make-believe if you believe, if you believe, if you believe in me. Thank you. 1932, that was written by Harold Arlen and Yip, who would name their kid Yip? But Yip Harburg. My 80-pound guitar back in its saddle here. My kids gave me this guitar for my 80th birthday. They figured for 80 years, it's a pound a year. But Yip Harburg and Harold Arlen wrote this in 1932. The same folks that wrote Over the Rainbow, by the way, from The Wizard of Oz. So, to ask the question, what is the Great American Songbook? Where can I find it? Who wrote it? Can you order it on Amazon? Can you walk down the library and pick up a volume and take it home and read it? No, you can't do any of that stuff. It's not a bound edition. What it is, it's a body of work of the most important and influential popular songs from the early 20th century up to the present time. But there's no end to it. It's just a continuing adding on songs all the time. There's no cutoff time. Because of any song from the beginning of the era that is heard, sung, and known collectively by millions of people is eligible to be in the Great American Songbook. The time in which this music was written was tough times here in America. It was a morale booster during 2 world wars. It offered hope for better days during the Great Depression. Helped build social bridges within our culture, mainly between the blacks and the whites. In other words, a lot of things were happening to inspire the writing of these tunes. They were created mainly from Broadway shows and from Hollywood musicals. Like movies like with Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire and Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald and Howard Keel and Jane Powell and who else am I forgetting? Corlin McRae and Shirley Jones, all those folks. The music of this genre also is referred to standards. American standards are just standards. Like if you bought an album and I'd come up to you and I'd say, oh great, Sinatra album, huh? Yeah. What's on it? You would say just a bunch of standards. Then I'd know that it was just from this collection, not from a novelty song that was thrown in or somebody wrote something special for that album. There was a big change in songwriting. Excuse me, come the 19th century, come the 20th century. In the 19th century, the music was more predictable, melodically and harmonically. The change to a more interesting and complex tunes didn't happen overnight. It was a process. In 1882, Charles Harris writes the song After the Ball. I think you know what I'm talking about. It's kind of a sing-along song, waltz also. The world of publishing sheet music now started to flourish, and this song sold more than 1 million copies of sheet music. That's incredible for that time. I think there was probably 10 million people in the United States then. And that's just a drop in the bucket compared to when it started moving on close to the 20th century. That's in B flat, by the way. Going towards the 20th century, there was 10 million copies of sheet music. Because, when you come right down to it, that was the only way to get music into the home. Is you had a piano player, or piano, hopefully, and that's what happened. He in turn, this Charles Harris in turn writes a book called, a very complex title, How to Write a Song. Now there was a blueprint for writing music. Beforehand, it was like put together very simply, and there was not too much excitement to it. But when it was fairly complex. I got little bits and pieces of it on Wikipedia and on the internet, and you know, it was pretty complex. How many words should be in a song? Where the verses, how many verses should be in it? How many commas? You know, all that punctuation and stuff, and where the bridge goes and why it's there and all that stuff. But he really set a blueprint for songwriting. As time marched into the 20th century, a mass arrival of immigrants came to America from Europe. Most of the parents of the songwriters of this period were among these arrivals. Many of them were Jewish and from religious traditions from Russia and Germany, including the likes of parents of George Gershwin and Jerome Kern. Wanting the best for their children in this new country, they provided the best education they could, not only in reading, writing, and arithmetic, but the arts. Music fell into that category. And I know that George Gershwin and Jerome Kern, and I'll reference them mostly because they're my favorites, studied classical music as children, and they moved up gradually into including everything into their repertoire. Using the music they were used to hearing from their parents and in their synagogues, and along with the rhythms and phrasing of the ever-evolving black minstrel shows and folk music, black folk music, I guess today we would call that blues. They started to write songs with more structure and sophistication, with more risk-taking, which made the music more imaginative musically and lyrically. I say risk-taking. That doesn't mean that they get up on a high wire and write a song while they're doing that. But like a chord is 3 notes. I'm not going to get into music theory, but a chord is 3 notes usually. Now, all of a sudden, they decided maybe throw another note into that chord to make it more exciting and have a little more meat to it. And so those things started to develop slowly but surely. But today's popular music seems to be taking a backward step, if you ask me. The tunes are comprised of like 3 chords, and the lyrics, they're lacking in many ways. I've been called an elitist and a snob, mainly by myself, because I am. When I come to the music of today, I just, you know, well, let me phrase it this way. As Duke Ellington once said, there's only 2 kinds of music in this world. There's good music and there's bad music. And I guess there's some nice things that are being written today. And there's not. There's probably, back in the 20s, there was some stuff that wasn't too great either. So, you know, but time will only tell, you know. Will the popular songs being written today be a lasting force and be recorded by other artists? Or will it just be recorded by themselves, the guy that wrote it and performed it? In other words, when the artist of the song is no longer popular, the song that they are known for will no longer be known. That won't be popular either, and it won't be enduring, you know. It's just going to fade away. The songbook includes such songwriters as the laundry list of the Hall of Famers, I guess you'd call it, George Gershwin, Hoagie Carmichael, and Harold Arlen, and Harry Warren, Jerome Kern, Irving Berlin, Duke Ellington, Cole Porter, Richard Rodgers, and of course the great Johnny Mercer. Speaking of taking a break, and speaking of all these composers, I'd like to bring to the piano right now a few of these songs performed by our neighbor and friend, Alice Waddington.
Well, I had piano lessons from Arthur Edwards, who lived 3 doors up the street from our house on South Main Street, Woodstown. And I also had a neighbor who was a year older than I, who didn't have lessons, and he played the things I wanted to play. He played the way I wanted to play. So I had this internal battle all the time. So I taught myself to play the way Charles played. But I had my grandmother had a cousin who was a piano player. We used to stand around the piano and sing with her. And those late 1800s songs he's talking about, we sang a lot. And then my father wanted to hear them, so I learned to play them and played them while he sat by the piano and sang. So, I make mistakes. But let's see if you know what these songs are.
do you know the songs at all? Yeah. What was the first one, you remember? Deep Purple, is right. Written by a guy named Peter DeRose. Not too well known, but not a very talented guy, as talented as the rest of them. Second was
It had to be
Had to Be You. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I played that twice.
All right, it's a great song. Isham Jones, or Isham Jones, I don't know what part of the country you're from, wrote that song. He's another guy that wrote a few songs you probably haven't heard of him, but he's a great composer as well. And the third song was
Embraceable You.
Embraceable You. Written by anybody? George Gershwin. George Gershwin wrote that, yeah, back in the day. And then Up a Lazy River, written by, fits in right with his personality, the guy that wrote it. Hoagie Carmichael. wrote that. Great singer. Thanks, Alice. That was great. The music of the Great American Songbook is timeless. Today they are still being recorded and performed by contemporary artists such as Michael Feinstein, who's Michael Feinstein, you ask, Harry Connick Jr., you've heard of him, I'm sure, Michael Bublé, who's kind of the second coming of Sinatra. He's a great singer, does a wonderful job with the standards. And my personal favorite, Diana Krall and John Pizzarelli, which you're probably saying who, but one of these days, Andy, if you allow me to come back here and do something on this, maybe we could put a couple of clips of some of these folks up there. You know, really talented people. Michael Feinstein, for example, he started a foundation, the Great American Songbook Foundation, where he offers scholarships to kids that are like in high school shows and then goes on to college, and college shows that want to pursue their education, possibly getting on into Broadway and stuff and this and that and the other thing. And he offers scholarships to them and stuff, does a great job. Harry Connick was a prodigy. You know, he's had a symphonic recital at the age of 8, you know, down in New Orleans. He was born in New Orleans, so he kind of gets that vibe too. But then came the pop and rock artists that kind of jumped the fence. Rod Stewart from England, he's made a couple, 3-4 albums of the Great American Standards. Paul McCartney made a great album not that many years ago. Willie Nelson also made a great album for standards, and still made some fairly recent. He's got a couple albums out. They decided to take that step forward and record albums of these wonderful tunes, which I'm very happy about. In the beginning of this era, before the invention of the phonograph records and recording equipment in the radio, the popular way of getting music to the masses was the sheet music industry. These popped up all over the United States, in Chicago, St. Louis, Boston, Philadelphia, San Francisco, you know, everywhere. But mainly the concentration was New York City, in Manhattan, part of New York City, and otherwise known in this section of Manhattan as Tin Pan Alley. Part of these publishing houses were retail stores that sold sheet music that they had published. So to advertise these songs written by an elite group of songwriters, they would hire a piano player to come outside of their establishment. And they'd drag a piano outside on the sidewalk. And these guys would sit down there and play tunes. People say, hey, that's a catchy tune, and they'd go in and they'd buy their sheet music. They hoped that would work that way. But there was a lot of piano players out there doing this stuff. It was not unlike back in our day. Well, I went to high school in Philadelphia, and I used to have to catch 2 buses to get to where I was going up to Northeast Catholic and Northeast Philadelphia. So I'd catch a bus that would drop me off at Germantown and Cheltenham. And going to school, there was a bus waiting usually in your driveway to school. Coming back, I had a half-hour wait between the wait for that second bus, and there was a record store right on the corner. Well, actually, it wasn't on the corner. Flag Brothers shoe store was on the corner. They were right next door. And outside, they would have loudspeakers, and you'd hear the songs outside. At least they did in Philly, anyway. I don't know about where you folks grew up. They had this, but same idea. You go by and say, "Oh, there's Patty Page singing "Doggy in the Window" or something," you know, and you'd go in and buy it. They hope. They also had listening booths where you could go in there and grab a stack of records, or, yeah, you go in there, put either earphones or it was soundproof booths. You'd listen and pick out what you like and you go to the counter and you buy it. But not me. You know, I'd go in there every day just about, you know, play records. One day a guy kept banging on the door. Hey kid, you're buying those records? I said, I don't, get out of here and stay out of here. But I did. I was back in no time flat. I mentioned Tin Pan Alley a minute ago. The name Tin Pan Alley was coined by a journalist named Monroe Rosenfeld. He was writing an article for the New York Herald. And he was leaving a group of publishers' office on West 28th Street between Broadway and 6th Avenue. And the racket of all those competing pianos heard in the alley, he kind of boggled his mind. Yeah, let me picture this. Picture this. Here's a piano. You have a piano. You have a publishing house here with a piano outside. Guy playing a tune. Half a block down the street, you've got another publishing house with a piano outside. Guy playing a different tune. So you go to the next block. There's another piano player, publishing house. There's like 8 pianos all playing different tunes. So he walks out, and of course, 6th Avenue is just this kind of skinny street, and he's hearing all this stuff, and he said it sounded like a bunch of tin pans clanging. So he referenced that in the article he wrote, and so hence Tin Pan Alley was called. Many of the soon-to-be popular composers of this era started their careers by being song pluggers, they were called. It's piano players outside. Gershwin did it, Jerome did it, Jerome Kern did it too. Gershwin started writing at this time, and he would go to his boss, I guess, in the publishing house and say, listen, do you mind if I play some of my own compositions? And he said, well, no, we'll split the profits on that. If they buy it, I'll split it with you. And this is kind of how it got started, because not only people that liked his tunes would go in and buy it, but they liked his tunes to say, hey, would you play for my daughter's wedding in a month, or we're having an affair at my place, or something or other, this, that, and the other thing. And he was hired actually off the street as a rehearsal piano player for a Broadway show. Where usually rehearsals just have a piano, you know, you do the dance numbers and all that kind of stuff. And he was hired to do that. So one thing led to another. He started meeting the right people on Broadway. He was starting to write shows then, and music and this and that. And then he became what he was. With the arrivals of phonograph record and the radio and sheet music, the sheet music business began to fade, of course. People had other ways of listening to music, radio, phonographs, and so forth. As mentioned before, many homes had pianos back in the day, and the sheet music, back then, the music business, sheet music business flourished. Let's take another break right now, and I'd like to call up one of our Village All-Stars. That's what you are, Village All-Stars. I think you'll know who I'm talking about when I say that this gentleman presides right here on this stage, right here on our stage, every month as the Residents Association President, Dave Wattrell. Come on, Dave.
This song, I did that just so you know it was really me, because I always talk without the microphone turned on. This song was written by a man named Hal Hempfield. And you say, who's he? Well, Hal Hempfield, he lived in Clifton. And he was given the task of writing additional music for a Broadway play called Everybody's Welcome. Apparently, when Everybody's Welcome opened in Philadelphia, everybody might have been welcome, but nobody came. And so he wrote a bunch of songs, one of which endured. The play itself, the Broadway musical, lasted only a couple of months, but the song endures. must remember this. A kiss is still a kiss. A sigh is still a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by. And when two lovers woo, they still say, I love you. On that you can rely. No matter what the future brings as time goes by. Moonlight and love song, never out of date. Hearts full of passion, jealousy and hate. Woman needs man, and man must have his mate, that no one can deny. It's still the same old story, a fight for love and glory, a case of do or die. The world will always welcome lovers as time goes by. And when two lovers woo, they still say I love you. On that you can rely. No matter what the future brings as time goes by. Thanks, Sophie. Just like we did all the other times.
Your underarrangement, great arrangement by Dave Watson. That's great, thanks, Dave.
That was Casablanca.
My 80-pound guitar here again. Yeah,
Was it written for Casablanca?
Now, here comes my dear friend that's going to throw a monkey wrench right into this whole mess. The arrival of rock and roll. The music just changed fundamentally in the 50s and 60s at the arrival of rock and roll, a period that coincided with the collapse of the sheet music industry as well. As we know, rock and roll took over to become the prominent music of the day and of that time, and still is today. Yet a stunning revival of the Great American Songbook was to come. Starting with, believe it or not, the first person to really start bringing these old tunes back again was a rock and roll guy, Ringo Starr of all people, believe it or not. He was the first modern musician to try to breathe new life into these classic tunes. He wanted to, actually he didn't really care one way or another, but his bandmates, John Lennon and Paul McCartney and George Harrison, had cut albums themselves, solo albums of singing, but they were like rock tunes and tunes that they wrote. Now, they asked Ringo about it, and he says, yeah, I'll give it a shot. He says, but how about if I do some tunes that I grew up with? My parents used to sing and play records around the house. They thought it was a terrific idea, and so they bankrolled him and, just supported him all the way with this. It was moderately popular, I guess. The critics were kind of so-so on it. The rock critics thought he was jumping the fence, so they weren't too happy about him. But he was pretty popular in England, because that's where he was from. This was followed by, the album was called Sentimental Journey, by the way. it was in 1970, and that song was, of course, was in the album. And Willie Nelson then made an album in '78, which was very popular, called Stardust. And he's since has done, oh gosh, maybe 4 or 5 albums of standard tunes. And he used to be, well, he's a country guy, he still is a country guy, but he would kind of just have a moderate repertoire, I guess, of the knowledge of the guitar. You know, he did very well in country. But boy, you're to hear him now, he's all over that thing, you know, he's really a player. He's really made himself a real popular guy in every genre. His album was called Stardust, and the Stardust was in it. Sometime if you have your computer folks, get on YouTube or something, punch up Willie Nelson doing Stardust. It's really a great thing. Stardust is an interesting song in its own right. That was written by Mitchell Parish and Hoagie Carmichael again. And that song is probably, it still holds the record for the song that's been recorded by more artists than anybody else. Over 100 artists have recorded that song. That's really quite a feat. Linda Ronstadt jumped on the bandwagon. She did an album called What's New back in 1983. Natalie Cole did an album called Unforgettable with Love. She did tunes of her father's, Nat Cole, on this album. It's a great album. She's no longer with us. That's a shame. She died way too young. Not all the musicians that have tackled the Great American Songbook in the past 40 years have gone with a full big band kind of sound that they hate in their heyday. That's the way the songs were done. But there's been many interesting incarnations, including albums by, you'll never guess, Luciano Pavarotti. He made a couple of albums of standard tunes. Great stuff. Bette Midler, she used to kind of poo-poo that, and she did stuff that was like current Broadway songs. But now she's on the bandwagon, and she's made a lot of albums and in her shows of using these great tunes. Rufus Wainwright, Annie Lennox, Sinead O'Connor, the popular singers, a lot of them have made albums. But in 2014, the collaboration between the great Tony Bennett and this lady who is a diva of the rock world, lights and whistles and fireworks and furs and lions and tigers on the stage and stuff. Lady Gaga did an album together. And boy, is that great. You know, I figured, that's nice giving give the kid a break, Tony, But that chick can sing, I'll tell you. She's great. She's great. And as a matter of fact, that album was in the top 10 all over the world. That really sold a lot. And that's also on a YouTube video, the making of that album. That'd be interesting to watch. Well, while the historical era in which the Great American Songbook was born, of course, it had ended. There are still songs being written today that demonstrate the characteristics of the Great American Standards. Songs by Barry Manilow, who was very popular in his day. He sang songs to me were kind of mediocre, but boy, did he write some neat stuff. Henry Mancini wrote a lot of good stuff. Billy Joel, still writing today. And there's a lot of others too. In a book written by the American composer and author Alec Wilder, in 1978, he compiled 300 songs that were in the Great American Songbook. Counting, of course, that every day there's added on. The first song alphabetically in his novel that he wrote was the Accentuate the Positive, alphabetically. Now, in the last one in there was You're the Top by Cole Porter. Today there's a lot more. Probably my last doing research on this thing, somebody named over 1,000 tunes in the Great American Songbook. Now, this was back in '78 when Alec Wilder wrote his book. The earliest entry in Wilder's book was in 1911, written by Irving Berlin, Alexander's Ragtime Band. Wow. And that was the first entry that he researched by a popular Great American Songbook composer. And the last edition was a song in 1960, in the 60s anyway, The Shadow of Your Smile, written by a guy named Johnny Mandel, who did some great film work and stuff. What songs make the list? Not too many of today's songs will make that list because, as I mentioned earlier, the hits of today belong to the singer and that singer only, and when he's gone, so's the song. You'll never hear it again, probably. As back in the day, many singers and instrumentalists recorded and performed songs written by popular composers. These composers collectively wrote thousands of songs, yet most of them are only known for a handful of their greatest hits. There are songs that have endured the most and have been recorded and performed the most and have become classics. Why didn't a lot of these songs endure? Because they were written at the moment about the current event or person that you really didn't know. Cole Porter was somebody that did that. He was born in a little small town in Missouri, and he wrote a song early in his career about the mayor of the town that was found to have his hand in the cookie jar. You know? So he wrote a song about that, and the guy went to jail, and this and that and the other thing. And I guess the folks around Missouri thought it was entertaining, but it didn't do much. But he kept on writing these things, but he found that the other songs that he wrote were becoming the ones that were popular, like Cheek to Cheek, and tons of stuff. Cole Porter is a phenomenal songwriter. Another reason a tune could have staying power can be played in different ways. For example, most tunes are written in 4/4 time, which is probably just about every tune you hear today, or yesterday even, is written in 4/4 time. But if you did it in waltz time, it'd be equally as appealing to you. It even could be done in Latin rhythm. Bossa novas, taking standards and making bossa novas out of them, it could be done that way too. One other reason that it could be done as a ballad, or it could be done as an up tune, something with a little bit of a pop, little swing tune out of it. So it, you can bounce these things all over the place with these tunes, and they still last, and they sell no matter what they're doing. I'd like to, if I may, give you an example of a tune that can be done as a ballad, and then all of a sudden it can also be done as a song, a little up-tempo thing. So let me try that for you. What a day this has been. What a red mood I'm in. Why, it's almost like being in love. Got a smile on my face, for they hold you in embrace. Why, it's almost like being in love. All the music of life seems to be like a bell that is ringing for me. And from the way that I feel when that bell starts to peal, I would swear I was falling. I'd swear I was falling. It's almost like being in love. What a day this has been. What a rare mood I'm in. Why, it's almost like being in love. Got a smile on my face, for the whole you embrace. Almost like being in love. starts to peel. I'd swear I was falling, I'd swear I was falling. Almost like being, yeah, it's almost like being, it's almost like being in love. Almost got through it. So as you see, it can be, done either way. The tunes would fit a variety of performers and styles. The Broadway singer, the pop artist, the jazz musician, even classical singers and musicians, such as, Jerry will love this, Itzhak Perlman made an album of standards with a jazz piano player named Oscar Peterson. He made 2 albums with him. It's wonderful to hear the classical violin player and the jazz piano, how that fit in. It was great. And of all people, and I never thought until I researched this, that the generation before Itzhak Perlman, who was one of the top-notch classical musicians, Yehudi Menuhin also made a couple of albums with a guy named Stéphane Grappelli, who's a French jazz violinist, and that's really surprised me because I've seen him before in clips. He's very stoic and very, but he's fun, really fun to listen to that. Now the reason jazz artists are drawn to these tunes is because they're so strong musically and the chords are so interesting that it gives them the ability to improvise around them. Makes it more interesting. Back in the time, in the middle of the heyday of this era, it was a different time then, different now. Most of the composers knew and respected one another and were willing to help each other. They wouldn't even try to think of stealing any of their material and stuff. Now, every now and then you read in the paper that somebody's suing somebody because he stole their material. A rock guy stole other guy's material. They don't seem to understand that you can take the chords of a song, like I was accompanying myself here, and I could write an entirely different melody to that, and it's perfectly legal to do that. You just can't steal the melody and do that. There's a story about Harold Arlen and the lyricist Yip Harburg again, the guys who wrote Over the Rainbow, who also wrote the first song we did. They were stuck on how the ending of Over the Rainbow should be. At a get-together at Ira Gershwin's house, the subject came up. And I don't know how they wanted, either the producers of The Wizard of Oz or Judy Garland or somebody or other wanted to, didn't want the song to just end like, birds fly over the rainbow, why, oh, why can't I, period, boom, So no, we need something special at the end of that. Why? But here they were stuck for doing it, old Yip and Harold. They couldn't figure anything out. So Ira, after they talked about it a while, he kind of sashayed over I don't know whether he sashayed over, but he got up and walked over to the piano. And he started diddling around and stuff. He says, hey Yip, hey Harold, come here, I got something for you. So he came up with this, said, why, oh, why can't I, when happy little bluebirds fly across the river, da 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 da. And that ended the tune. Problem solved. They loved it. They took it to Judy. They took it to the producers. They said, beautiful, great. So it was just helping out each other, and that I'm sure that happened. They cross-referenced all this stuff. Gershwin didn't expect any credit for it, and he didn't get any. He was happy to do it. I listed at the beginning of this presentation some of the names of the composers, and I listed number 1 was George Gershwin, and I did that on purpose because I just love the guy and I love the music. George wrote I call him George. He's a buddy of mine. He wrote such beautiful stuff, such inventive and just marvelous. it was some of the tunes that he wrote. Most of them, his tunes were written for Broadway shows. I can't think of any, and I'm sure there was a couple that he just wrote as pieces that he could sell as one piece, but just about everything came out of his Broadway shows, Embraceable You, But Not For Me, Foggy Day, stuff like that. It was Alec Wilder who wrote in his bestseller on the songbook, which I quoted before, described Gershwin as the most talented, inventive, sophisticated, and jazz-oriented of all the great craftsmen of pop music in the first half of the 20th century. That's really saying a lot. You know, I'd really like to continue on about these great composers, but that might be for another time. I think we're kind of, well, we're not doing bad, I guess, but before we conclude, this is important to me, if you don't mind. I would like to salute one of the great lyricists of all times. Now, lyricists usually take kind of a back seat, you know, like Richard Rodgers, everybody, oh, Hammerstein, yeah, he was good, you know, but Rodgers got all the attention. And Harold Arlen got the attention. Old Yip took a back seat a little bit too, you know. But I like to look at lyricists and look at their ability to write poetry, because that's what it is. This guy, hardly anybody's heard of him, I guess. Milton Blake, you know. But I just love this tune all the time. It's so lyrical, so beautiful. The words. If there was a Pulitzer Prize for lyric writing, I'm sure this guy would have gotten it for sure. So I'd like not to get the music in the way of this. I'd like to recite the lyrics of this beautiful masterpiece. If you don't mind, I would do that. So just listen for a moment and see if you don't agree with me. Mercy dotes and dozy dotes, a little lambsy divey, a kiddly divey too, wouldn't you? Yes, mercy dotes and dozy dotes and little lambsy divey, a kiddly divey too, wouldn't you? Here's where it is, right here. And if the words sound queer and funny to your ear, a little bit jumbled and jivey, sing mercy dotes and little lambsy divey. Oh, mercy dotes and dozy dotes and little lambsy divey, a kiddly divey too, wouldn't you? Doesn't that get you? Well, thanks. I conclude with that. Thanks for your fine attention. Listen, I want to thank Glenn again for doing this, helping out, and Alice as well. That was terrific, Alice, and Dave, that was great, and Andy for your technical stuff. And I'd like to thank also my long-suffering wife who had to put up with me for the last couple of months. Hey, what do you think of it? Like, Elaine, what do you think of it? Should I do this? No, I shouldn't do that. So tell me to do that. But finally came up, so she's a smile on her face. Very happy. And thank you all for coming. It was great to do this. Well, we have a couple of minutes. Andy, would you like to do it too?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Oh, wow. Tempo like 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. Okay.
The summer wind came blowing in from across the sea. It lingered there to touch your hair and walk with me. All summer long we sang a song, and then we strolled that golden sand. Two sweethearts and the summer wind, like painted kites, those days and
nights, they went flying by. The world was new beneath the blue umbrella sky. Then softer than a piper man, one day he called to. I lost you to the summer wind. The autumn winds and the winter winds, they have come and gone. And still the days, those lonely days, they go on and on and on. And guess who sighs his lullabies through nights that never end? My fickle friend, the summer wind, the summer wind, oh, the summer wind. Thank you.
We have Andy sing one more before we head off to the great, you think you have time, Andy?
Oh, yeah. One more song.
One more song to sing? Listen, he can be here till midnight, believe me. You know, nothing wrong with that either, I'll tell you. Okay, a little intro here, maybe. Give me a tempo on this.
L is for the way you look at me. O is for the only one I see. V is very, very extraordinary. E is even more than anyone that you adore can love, is all that I can give to you. Love is more than just a game for two. Two in love can make it. Take my heart and please don't break it. Love was made for me and you. L is for the way you look at me. O is for the only one I see. V is very, very extraordinary. E is even more than anyone that you adore can love, is all that I can give to you. Love is more than just a game for two. Two in love can make it. Take my heart and please don't break it. Love was made for me and you. Love was made for me and you. I said love was made for me and you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to Vince. It's one
want to say thanks one more time to Vince for this great presentation of the Great American Songbook. Give him one more round of applause.
Okay. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. I'm going to shut it off.
Well, let me smile first. Let me smile.
Let me zoom in on you there.